Brendan Patrick, do you have a favorite deck builder in Flesh and Blood that you're always interested to see what they're going to bring to a PT? You're looking for their name. What hero are they playing? What are they going to bring? Whether it's calling, nationals, PT, or maybe they're posting something on Twitter. Is there someone you're always looking out for? A name.
My answer is so uninteresting. It's so uninteresting. How about you guess who you think my answer is?
Is it a Michael?
Yes. Yes.
Is it Michael Hamilton?
Yes, it is. I mean,
interesting.
It is just fascinating what Michael Hamilton specifically brings to tournaments, in my opinion. I don't know if he's the most innovative and the most interesting deck builder, but I know when I go to a Pro Tour or to a World Championships, especially if I'm casting, I'm particularly interested to see what Michael Hamilton ends up on. Because I used to think prior to Barcelona, the other B.
I was about to say Barcelona.
Yeah, I used to think before Barcelona, I was like, he takes a really objective, quantitative approach to picking his deck, and I think that's a great approach. And then in Barcelona, the Wolfpack was unironically on Bravo, which let's be real.
I think they do. I think they do.
Yeah, the math was actually not that bad. But I would tell you that there was a rumor circulating around in Barcelona that team was playing Bravo, and it was such a stretch that we all just accepted it to be a psyop. Like, I don't think anybody took that seriously. Like, I heard that maybe 5-6 days before the tournament. And we put no weight on it.
So Michael Hamilton's your answer. I think it's a great answer. Obviously, Michael's play, things like Bullander, for instance, back in the day. And yeah, generally probably plays the best numbers or best value decks, I think, is generally kind of been what Michael's known for. Not always, sometimes just purely just, I think great meta picks or the best deck in the format, but I agree.
Can I guess yours?
Well, sure, you can guess mine.
I don't know if this is yours, but I think it would be fair. I think a Nicky B.
Well, Nick's my friend, so I'm always, and I've played some of his decks before and vice versa and worked with him on decks. But actually, my favorite probably person I'm always looking out for to see, not necessarily what hero they play, but I'm always keen to see their deck list afterwards, is Juan Pablo Pinto.
Okay.
Because I think he builds the cleanest decks. I think his list always looks super clean. He usually plays 3 elves everything. I'm always looking out for Pablo. Anyway, the reason I asked this, Brendan,
I have a funny story about Pablo, if I can, real quick. It's just fun. It's just funny you say that, because in the Los Angeles Pro Tour, I got to sit next to Pablo.
Playing Reinhardt, by the way.
Yes, playing Reinhardt, by the way. I got to sit next to Pablo for the players' meeting. And he was not super confident in his deck pick at that time. I don't think a lot of people are. You show up, it's the morning of, you're starting to hear rumors of a metagame that you were not expecting, and you're like, wow, I'm on Reinhardt. And then you start to doubt yourself a bit. Pablo ended up doing very well with that deck, I believe. Mm-hmm. But yeah, he was not very confident in the selection that morning.
Yeah, actually a madman bringing Reinhardt to that event. I played a lot of Reinhardt for PTLA, and madman. But anyway, those are some of the best deck builders, and that's what we are going to talk about in the main topic of the pod, which we'll get to in a bit. Brendan, this week in Flesh and Blood, anything on? It's kind of an interesting time because we've just come out of national season. PT Amsterdam is at this point a week away from kicking off from PT Amsterdam, and then we've got this kind of skirmish season coming up.
Yeah, and then I got like a quadruple whammy because I started a new job last week, and I'm also moving across the country like in the next couple weeks. So I'm a little bit over my head. I'm not going to lie. I thought prior to taking the job, I was like, I got nothing going on. It's chill. Everything's good. And yeah, not the case. I had a lot more responsibilities than I expected, to be honest. Like, it's been very much overwhelming these past couple weeks. I'm trying to still, especially when I got to San Diego, I really got to figure out how I'm going to sort of manage all those current responsibilities. It's been a lot. It's less about like hopping on recording the podcast. It's all the little things outside of that are. It's just hard. Like if you're actually working like a job where you have these like set hours, it's hard to find that 30 minutes that you used to quickly sort of bang those things out. So it's been tough, to be honest. Yeah.
Oh goodness, got a view there.
They can't see it. It's only waist up. Good. You got a little inner thigh there.
Yeah, I just got to see below Brennan's waist. Anyway, I told you last week I was playing some Riptide post nationals.
I saw your tweet,
played some more Riptide. this week. Yeah. I did. I tweeted this week and said if I was going to PT Amsterdam, which I'm not, unfortunately, I'd be seriously considering Riptide. I think I've cooled a little bit out on that after playing some more games this week. I think Riptide is a lot more powerful than it was, prior to, particularly with, I think, things like Droma in the format, even as far back as Lexi, obviously. But I think even with the kind of lead internationals, printing of some new cards, and kind of the meta shifting, I think into Zen and New, like Riptide is pretty reasonable. I think it has some troubles into other decks in the format, particularly things like Victor and Prism. Honestly, though, although I think Zen is a reasonable matchup for Riptide, we played a game of we played like a 5 or maybe 4 or 5 sets, 4 or 5 games in a set the other night, myself and Mr. Damakai. And Zen is still pretty insane, right? And it just drew very, very, hit the bonds turn. Hey, look, there's a lot less bonds now. But sometimes, Brendan, you just draw them and it don't matter, right?
Yes. That's the sentiment I've seen, is that deck is still probably the best.
Yeah, I think it's still definitely the best deck. And we talked about that last week as well, right? But yeah, so I definitely cooled a little bit on Riptide. I think if I was in a position of, getting ready to lock in a deck for the PT, I think I might flip back to something like Dash. It looks like the mid is really going to shake down to kind of this Zen versus what's the Zen counter? Is that New? Is it something like Victor, for instance? People are going to be jumping onto Kano. I think Kano is a very good choice. I think in the end, I would be looking at something like Kano Dash or just defaulting to something like Zen. But Zen mirror matches. I do not want to play a single Zen mirror match if I can help it. So
love to hear the K word come out of your mouth. I do have a non-flesh and blood question for you. How has the Hayden Dale running and general fitness journey been going? Because it is July, actually, which is usually when the Fab Fitness Challenge is held. How's it been going for you?
I've been quite sick for the past 2 weeks.
I forgot about that. Type A.
Yeah, so I got the flu, and then my breathing and this annoying cough is just not going away. My breathing's not recovered. So I've run 3 times this week, but it's I'm really trying to target easy runs and intervals at the moment because I can't run a long run or a fast run at the moment. But I do next weekend. So as of this pod dropping in 8 days' time, I have a Hyrox competition. So I'm really trying to get my breathing into a good spot for that. I'm a little bit worried about the competition because it's 8 kilometers of running split with exercises between each kilometer. So it's a lot of cardio and endurance and speed. So hopefully my breathing will be okay. Doing it in pairs. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But everyone runs the 8 kilometers and then you split the exercises.
Okay. I asked because so I went to a doctor this past week, a nephrologist, which is a kidney doctor. So the past 10 years, I've had 2 kidney markers that have come up on blood tests, and I had a lot of health issues over the past, a lot of my 20s, so I had a lot of blood tests. I had these 2 kidney markers that were consistently out of range. Creatinine was consistently high, and GFR was consistently low. Those, for an extended period of time, can be indicative of kidney disease, and progressive kidney disease at that, and I've been diagnosed with that. So I got new insurance recently, and I had to see a new nephrologist as a result. And I meet this guy, and he's like, you've been diagnosed with this. These are your numbers. My numbers look really fucking bad. Really bad. And he goes, there's actually this new test. It's called, they test for something called cystatin C. And it's made for people just like you. And I was like, people just like who? Just like me? So apparently, it's both genetic, but also a lifestyle and body composition kind of thing. And if you sort of have a high level of exercise on a daily basis and you have a low body fat and a high protein diet, these 2 numbers that they've been testing for and have been the standard for things like kidney disease for a long period of time can just be out of range, and that can be totally fine. And for about 8 to 10 years, I'd basically been told by many doctors that I was probably dying and it was going to come to some sort of bad thing in my sort of 35 to 40 range or something like that. It was actually the numbers were progressively getting worse. Got this cystatin C test. I'm totally fine. I had above average kidney function. Above average. It was
wow,
very surprising. But yeah, that was
stories have a happy ending then.
Yeah. It was it's kind of ridiculous. This guy, by the way, most excited nephrologist member of my life. He's like, I can't believe they have this test. I thought they would retire before they came out with this. I'm so excited. I can't wait to see. And I was like, bro, send it. I also
love when people get G'd up about something that's like really specific to their field.
Hell yeah. Also, like I just met so many apathetic and just like quick to sort of push me out the door. Doctors and nephrologists. So I was like, it was really nice. I've had a kidney biopsy for this reason, and it came back totally fine. There's like, oh, you'll show up in 5 years when you're dying, and I'm like, great. Also bring this up because there's a big lacrosse tournament here in DFW next weekend, and I'm casting. I tried to put on my jacket from from like San Jose. Bro, it does not fit at all. I look so ridiculous.
Too big. Yeah. Too big.
No, it's my shoulders. Like my shoulder, I literally can't. I look like a small child that's been dressed up to go to dinner.
This is the humble brag, everyone.
Yeah, it was bad. It was bad. I also put on my suit that I wore to my college graduation, and I think that people would find that pretty amusing. There is I could fit 2 of me in those pants right now. I used to be a big boy, 260 pounds. All right. And before we get into the podcast, we do have an announcement from our friends over at Green Tree Sports Card. They are proud to present Camp Green Tree, which a lot of you may have heard of on Twitter already. It's going to be on August 15th to August 18th. And it's a weekend of flesh and blood, competitive events, and camp activities. Hayden, where is it at? And what's going to be going on that weekend?
Well, I actually heard about this when I was at PTLA. They were telling me about it, and I was like, if I was in the US, I would definitely try and get over for this bit of camp activities. They've got an outdoor spot in Port Matilda, Pennsylvania, which I'm not super familiar with, but it is in central Pennsylvania, outside of State College. There'll be hundreds of acres available for participants to enjoy. Friday evening, they've got camp activities. Apparently sourced a lot of experienced camp counselors to come and deliver the best experience possible. You can join in some arts and rune crafts, mind you.
The magic of
secrets
Wraith.
Of the runic. Exactly. Learn the secrets of the runic language of Wraith. And can even learn some basic cosplay elements as well. You may be lucky enough to pummel a friend in one-on-one combat. Saturday, they have a 5K Classic Constructor tournament, which is awesome to see some great prize support there. There's also a qualifier for the Realm Games 50K that's happening again this year at Realm Fest in December. So that is a double down with a qualifier in that 5K kitty. Sunday is a Blitz 2K event alongside the day 2 of the 5K event. And then there's also a ton of side events that are going on as well. Ever wanted to try some cosplay? They'll be hosting a cosplay showcase. It's not a competition, and every participant actually gets prizing, so you can get in there and do some cosplaying and try your hand at that. And there's still lodging packages available on site and unlimited space for reserve for camping if you bring your own tent. Plenty of options for hotels, Airbnbs, etc. in the area as well. So they have food trucks, all this kind of thing. So check it out. You can go to www.gscfab.com to register. And they're hoping to see you there with Green Tree. If I was in the US, I would check this kind of thing out. I know there's been things like there's been a cruise, there's been like kind of these big weekend events, and that's one of my favorite things. Brendan, we get to things like PT, even Nationals weekend, Worlds weekend, obviously, and getting to hang out with lots of people. And I think more excuses to do that in a bit more of a casual environment, because I know you're a big proponent of getting to events for the people. As well.
And the places, for sure. I was thinking of a scenario while you're reading that out. I just got transported a bit. I was thinking about me and you, Warren, Pennsylvania nights. You see the fires are burning.
Campfire.
Yep. Campfires are burning. You can smell the firewood. And it's about time to wind down. You and I have decided we're gonna bring a tent, the Arsenal Pass tent. But as we go back,
bottle of cognac.
Yeah. As we go back to our campsite and we go to settle down, I tell you, Hayden, I'm a little tired. Do you think would you be the man and set up the tent? Are you the tent setup man? While I sit there and gaze out into the Pennsylvania night.
I mean, this sounds like standard. I just would have assumed this was going to happen.
Oh, have you ever had to set up a tent in unpleasant conditions?
Yes.
Oh, it sucks.
It's not fun.
It's terrible.
Windy conditions are the worst.
Oh, yeah, windy, freezing cold. Infestation of mosquitoes. Not that it's going to happen here, but I've had that happen in Oregon one time. And I remember the only respite I had was that, once it actually gets so cold, mosquitoes tend to get lethargic and they went to sleep. So thank God, because I got eaten alive before that happened. That's my little tidbit.
You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. and all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Friends News, Brendan. Skirmish Season 9 is happening very, very soon. It's 24th of August to 8th of September. Living Legend format. I know we talked about this the other week, but we'd like to see a Living Legend, something like a Calling, Pro Quest. We've talked about it. Wow, whoa. But we did talk about it a lot. I'm actually going to definitely hit at least 2 of these skirmishes and play some Living Legend. But I want to know in the comments. I know nothing about Living Legend. So what should I be playing in Living Legend? I would assume with some of the changes, maybe Iceland is back on the table, maybe Bravo, start the show is a little bit better. I would like to play something like a Runeblade. So if someone can give me some suggestions, maybe even some links, some deck lists.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can do that.
Chain,
but
Viscerai.
if you can, that'd be helpful.
Surely Vis. I feel like Vis would be quite good.
Yeah, can I play Viscerai, guys? I would love to. All right. Anyway, I don't know if you've seen the prize as well, Brendan, but they've the top 4 is like Cold Foil, Channel Mount Heroics, which is pretty sick.
Yeah.
So that's a big part of the reason. Maybe I need to play 3 events. Well, I'll play as many events until I get top 4s. How about that? So I get a playset of Cold Foil, Channel Mount Heroics. Maybe that's my play.
Yeah, which is pretty exciting for this upcoming set.
Yeah. There is Blitz as the format as well. So it's kind of split between Living Legend and Blitz. Go to fabtcg.com, event finder, and see what Skirmish Season 9 events. I can't believe we've had 9 seasons of Skirmish. That's actually insane.
That is insane.
Happening around you.
How many seasons of Skirmish is it per year? 2 to 3 or
1 to, I think it's more like 2 now. But the first year there was, you got to think we're 5 years almost. This is almost the 5-year anniversary of Flesh and Blood, right?
That's kind of that's particularly
October.
Wild.
Yeah, I don't know if Alice has got anything planned for that, but it's almost 5 years of Flesh and Blood. So very, very cool. I think Rosetta will be before then, so it'll be more around the time of Worlds actually or just before, I guess, that we're celebrating that. So, all right, Brendan, should we get into the Command and Cookout? And we have, short news week this week. I don't have much else. But Command and Cookout, we have a question from Drick coming through on the Arsenal Pass Discord. If you do want to get your question in, you can either do it on Discord. If you're a patron, you can do it in the YouTube comments below. Let us know it's a Command and Cookout question like we had the other week and the week prior. You can tweet at us if you want to at Arsenal Pass Fab. And this question is, there's been some conversation on Twitter about draft policy and bad actors in the community. What measures would you like to see implemented either at the LGS level or LSS level to improve the competitive draft experiences? So this is interesting. This question actually came after week 1 of Nationals, and there were some questions raised about draft and integrity, basically keeping integrity at Nationals draft experiences. I think if you go to the highest level at Pro Tour and Worlds, this is really closely controlled in terms of obviously cards are stamped at that level, which helps a lot. And then also in terms of how they put people in for seeding and deck registration, it is reasonably good. The stamped cards are doing a lot of work there, though. Now, someone actually replied to this comment in our Discord and said, stamping the cards at all competitive and professional events, professional drafts comes to mind, which 1,000%. I know firsthand there's a ton of work to go through and repackage and stamp all these cards and packs and check them all. So a lot of effort and work. But there was a lot of kind of feedback around week 1 of Nationals for a couple of Nationals in particular, where basically people were worried that, 1, there was an opportunity to cheat very, very easily, and 2, that potentially people were taking up the opportunity to do so, which is obviously that second part is, you don't want people like that in the community. But I think the first part of it is just create environments where we don't allow people to do that. And quite interestingly, at Australian Nationals, our Nationals this year, last year I had these same concerns about kind of the ability to easily swap a card or 2 out in your draft without people knowing. You open up your first pack, you take something like a rare Brendan, a shitty rare that doesn't mean anything, you pass the pack along, and then when you walk into your table to do registration, you just kind of swap that rare out for a cheeky little Majestic, was something I was worried about people doing. Don't know if people did it, obviously, just was worried about the opportunity being there. This year for Australian Nationals, the head judge apparently spent a lot of time devising how he was going to make sure this couldn't happen, and ended up with a very good system where basically they moved people one at a time, cards all stayed on the table at all times, which I think was quite nice, and they did it pretty efficiently. So very, very hard to cheat in that situation, removing the opportunity for people, which I quite liked.
I remember how
Made me feel better.
how hilarious it used to be at some of the. When I say early tournaments, I don't mean early tournaments. I mean like the early callings in the United States. So particularly,
Oh, so I wasn't at those. How did that work?
it was pretty lax to say the least.
Yeah.
I would say U.S. Nationals was a step up from that, and U.S. Nationals was hilarious. U.S. Nationals #1 was no stamped cards. They gave you a little baggie, and then you walked with that baggie somewhere else. You had plenty of opportunities. Before that, oh, man, you were just kind of like I'm trying to remember. Outside of top 8, I feel like you like drafted, and you were sort of like free to kind of go around a little bit. I remember
Yeah, you walk to a build table where you register. Yeah.
Yeah, I just remember it was super lax. So yeah, the stamping did a lot, and it took us a while to actually get stamping. I was surprised how long it did take. To be honest,
PT1 had. Oh no, PT1 wasn't.
PT1 was class constructed. So
PT2 was stamped though. PT Lille was stamped cards. Yeah.
Yep, and you've played a calling since then. How's a limited calling? Do limited callings they're stamped now? Yeah.
Yes, they are. They are now stamped.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
correct.
that was the big difference.
Because it's day 2.
I want to talk about something that was mentioned in this comment, said either at the LGS or LSS level. And I know it's not what they're referring to, but you do have lesser competitive events that are held in LGSs, whether it's Road to Nationals or like the PQCs and stuff like that. I don't think that they should be stamped in that scenario. I understand there is a level of integrity that is lost because of that. And I think that is a okay margin to have, to be honest. And I have a very unusual stance on some of this, especially when it comes to like cheating at low levels. And I understand that this level leads to a high level and it is important, but I do think that I try not to take it too seriously, because I just feel like the people that cheat at those kind of events are outliers, and ultimately it's not the juice not worth the squeeze for like the very small amount of people that you would clip by adding in these measures that would sort of exponentially increase the amount of work and exponentially decrease the speed at which the event could be held. So I would say, even though the question is not referring to this, because even some nationals I believe are held in LGSs, when it does come to those lower level competitive events, I am okay with a little bit of sort of ambiguity and sort of like competitive integrity, for the sake of efficiency and sort of making things very accessible.
Yeah. I think my view would be tier 3 and tier 4 events need to be catered to, because the opportunity relates to a higher opportunity cost to do so, right? In terms of the reward for doing so. Whereas, maybe it's something like a Road to Nationals is a little bit less. I still think some firm policy from LSS around all tiers. So, maybe tier 3, tier 4 looks a little bit different around, there's the stamp card opportunity for official LSS events where they are running the event themselves or with a TO partner. And then versus, something like a Nationals where it's nominated TOs. Okay, what's the process there? And then when you get to tier 2 events like Road to Nationals, ProQuest, etc., at least some policy around probably best practice to, I guess, at least keep it consistent as well might be best case. But I agree with you. I think it's more for those kind of high levels. I think stamping is a lot of effort. I just don't think it should be put back on LGSs ever. It should be around LSS having policy on these things. And I think, honestly, based on the fact that they've taken a lot of feedback on from the last few things that have been thrown their way, I hope that we get some feedback post Nationals on the draft process, especially for Nationals.
Yeah, Flesh and Blood is interesting because I could just be out of touch, but from what I understand, I don't really know any active cheaters in Flesh and Blood that still play the game.
Well, there's a few. You go look at that ban suspended list, mate. There's some ban players on there.
Yeah, exactly. And I find that at least the rhetoric in other games like Magic, like there are sort of like active cheaters that sometimes slip through the cracks and don't immediately get banned. I've noticed, because it happens in the background, of course, but I've noticed in Flesh and Blood that has not been the case, that they've been pretty proactive with it. And yeah, it just like hasn't been a problem. I've never actually encountered someone openly cheating against me as well.
I think you have to I think it's pretty naive to think that there's not people cheating in Flesh and Blood.
There's not people cheating. I think that Flesh and Legend Story Studio seems to be pretty on top of it.
Yeah, I think so. In terms of
there's absolutely people cheating. I was fucking commentating the Tao game, like in Baltimore, if you remember that.
That's the thing, is if you think about the fact, if you see someone cheating on camera, right? I go back to like the Taiwan, the first Taiwan calling, where
Oh,
the
I
guy
don't know
swaps out
this.
the card
Oh yeah.
that got selected, and then this is in the final on camera, and they immediately investigate and DQ the player. Final doesn't get played plus turn 3. But like these sorts of things you see on camera, right? So imagine what you're not seeing on camera, and these people are willing to do not on camera. Like that's the thing. I mean, I've definitely suspected people of not playing to. I've suspected people of cheating before, for sure.
Yeah, I don't think I've suspected people of cheating.
Necessarily.
There's just been some pretty aggressive angle shooters. That's the extent of my experience.
That stuff is really clear, though. I think that sometimes the cheating, especially if you're really focused on your side of the table, I think that's when people get away with stuff. But anyway, it's. I think this question about draft integrity is a good one, and I think it's obviously been a discourse on Twitter. And I know some TOs in the weeks, in particular, I've got a shout out to Jackson, who was the head judge in Australia, who really took on that feedback and made sure that for the Australian Nationals this year, they really tightened up, this kind of issue that players had. So yeah. Great question. If you want to get your questions in for the Command Cookout, please do so. We got some space. Let's get on to the main topic, Brendan, because we've got a lot to cover. And this is probably one of my. I was messaging Brendan the week. I was like, I'm pretty juiced up about this topic.
Yeah. Before telling me the topic, by the way, it was like a whole week of like this topic fucking so good.
I just forgot to. Yeah. I just 2 messages. I just forgot to tell you what the topic is. So
I'm trying to build a narrative for the people here. Come on.
I went out, Brendan, and I asked some of our top players, some of the best pros in the world, and some of who I consider the best deck builders in the world, what's their number one tip for getting better at deck building? And I wanted to talk today in this main topic about kind of why these players, these particular sort of some of the best pros in the world, some of the best deck builders in the world, why they are so good at producing some of the best decks and how they consistently do it, and effectively what we can learn from what they're doing out there and improve our deck building ability and improve your deck building ability. So some of the people that we spoke to: Pablo Pintor, Brody Spurlock, names you'll know, Nick Butcher, and then Brendan Patrick, Hayden Dale. We also spoke to those guys, got their tips as well, so you'll get those. Let's just go through these. I'm gonna read out kind of what these players told us, and then I want to talk a little bit about them and see how we maybe can implement these tips, or if there's something that you've been doing in the past, Brendan, myself. So first one is
net decking people better than me. Let's go.
It's not my thing.
Let me start with Mr. Daniel Mackay, who is the New Zealand national champion, multiple calling top 8s, battle hardened winner. And his response to me immediately. So basically what I said to people was, hey, I'm doing some research for the pod. Would love to feature you as a deck builder or a top player, and I want to know what your number one tip is that we can share with the Arsenal Pass listeners for getting better at deck building in Flesh and Blood. And Dan replied with, use the expertise of people who know more than you, is what Dan said. Use the expertise of people who know more than you.
That's a life hack. That's not a Flesh and Blood hack.
That is very true. And then I said to him, I said, okay, but Dan, you've been involved. So Dan maybe isn't necessarily a deck builder, but he's definitely a tuner. And I said, you've been involved with tuning a lot of decks that have been taken to the high finishes.
Yeah.
And he said, I mean, yes, but there's still my main piece of advice for building better fab decks. Not just getting good lists from your friends, but talking to people who have strong understandings of specific decks or matchups rather than trying to figure everything out yourself. If you want a tip related to tuning decks, then it might be something closer to keep your game plans foremost to your mind when deciding what cards you want in your deck, both in general and in specific matchups. It's easy to think that certain cards might be alright into certain heroes, but Fab has way more interchangeability with its cards than a lot of other games. So I think you want to be focused on executing a winning game plan and ensuring that your card choices support that. This is a very interesting kind of comment that Dan makes, and I think is a kind of a common theme through a lot of what we got back from people was that really, distilling this down is to understand specifically what your deck does and keep in mind what your cards do, both generally in your deck, but also what they do in specific matchups.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. We were just talking about how many we had read prior to coming on, and I did not read this one, but it is astonishingly close to mine, even in spirit.
Brendan Patrick used Control-C, Control-V.
Yeah, not even that, the second part as well.
Control-C, Control-V on smart people is just a life hack, by the way.
So what does that mean in Flesh and Blood, though? Is that like testing groups? Because I think Dan makes a good point, really. Like, obviously that could be... so just for context, right? So me and Dan test together a lot. But also he's talking about, and I know he's someone who's pretty big on this, is actually just reaching out to other people who are prominent players of certain heroes. Or maybe it's someone... So I know he was talking about someone locally who's quite a good player on a particular class. And he's like, just ask them what they thought, for instance. But people have insights, right? That you might not have insight into because you haven't played the 300 hours of that hero or class that they have, and you can take something away from it.
If I can read mine out, I had 2 paragraphs.
All right, let's go to Brendan Patrick.
My second paragraph. In regards to deck building, I think net decking is underrated. I've known very high-level deck builders that due to their inflated egos will not look at already established decks/lists. As a result, they constantly try to reinvent the wheel, and a vast majority, if not all of their ideas, are terrible. Not allowing yourself to learn lessons from the experience of others is hubris.
I think I know who you're talking about.
Insanity to me. I've actually known 2 people across 2 different games that don't know each other, and they've done that. And as soon as someone says that, it's just like, I don't know how to take them seriously as a person. It's crazy. Someone's like, I won't look at this list because I'm smarter. And it's just, what? It's the most insane thing I've ever heard in my life. And I don't know. You cannot distill it down to anything except pure hubris and ego. The only thing you could say is that by looking at someone else's idea, it will sort of ruin your ability to come up with your own original thoughts, right?
Yes.
And it is taking you in the wrong direction. I think that that's a fallacy. I think that if anything, it should be like any information you get, if you're not bombarded with it, should just be an additional level of context to which you can evaluate the objective correct decision with. And I think that it's crazy.
So, we might go to Brody Spurlock after this because he has something similar to this. This is great. Yeah, that's fine. I just want to quickly talk about what you've just said. But the reason I just said Brody is because he kind of plays into, and we're going to kind of try and carry these narratives through in terms of link what people have been saying and what they responded to us. But I think you said that you think it's a fallacy to do that. I would say one of my approaches to this is to, if I think that there's an angle on a format that hasn't been explored, then what I might do first is I might step back, build what I think it should look like, and then I will go and look at all the information. Because it's not that I don't want it to be tainted, it's just that I don't want to be swayed. So if I go, say, and look at 10 lists and they're all playing the exact same kind of like 30-card core, it's going to be really hard for me not to think about that as the core of how this hero is being built. At least if I can start somewhere where I have this idea, this manifestation kind of an idea into a deck, and then I put that together, then I go and look at what people, and I'm not going to spend a big amount of time on this, maybe half an hour, whatever, and then I go and look at what other people are doing, and I go, oh, I missed this, or I missed that, or actually, this makes more sense, or hold up, I didn't think this was a good core, why did I not think this is a good core versus why they did? Let's play the 2 decks and understand, and then start to take some learnings from there.
So I don't disagree with you, and I think that's a good approach. I think it's not a bad approach, and it's not incongruent with my idea.
Yes.
What is incongruent with my idea is spending an entire testing season
looking things,
testing a combo deck against a fucking shitty AI, and then showing up halfway across the world with said combo deck without ever having tested into a person claiming that it was the truth. That is hubris. That is hubris, and you would be punished for that. In terms of like its efficacy. I have another paragraph. And this is my starting paragraph. So my top tip is to focus on on a core competency and understand that tech cards come at a cost, which is often diluting your primary game plan. It is often not correct to try and be prepared for everything, but instead to make an educated guess on the expected metagame and build your deck for that future scenario. Emotional decisions like overteching for Kano with precious sideboard slots are often quantitatively incorrect compared to just accepting a bad matchup for what can sometimes be less than 1 or 2% of a metagame. And I know the Kano thing can be distracting, but the top of that is the most important. The top of that
gets Kano in there.
Top of that is the most important, which is your deck has a core competency and it has a game plan that's trying to execute. And when you add cards that are not conducive to that game plan, you're actually reducing the power level of your deck, even if they're tech cards. And it's very hard to quantify or at least not quantify, but understand the percent at which your deck gets worse when you add in said tech card, because it is non-zero usually.
It's often exponential, to be honest. So I'll use an example of this, right? Defense reactions. Defense reactions hold a very specific place. Well, actually, they've held a very general place in Flesh and Blood as just value generators, right? 0 for 4s. How I can get 0 for 4s into my deck, not on the offensive end, but in the defensive end, without the need to use action points with defense reactions, right? Fate Foreseen, Sink Below have been staples of decks for this very reason. But the thing is if you play these, and so you play 54 cards, and then you play 3 Sync and 3 Fate. For the most part, that's going to take away from your game plan. It's not going to synergize with the rest of your deck. Now, there's obviously and there's actually no full exceptions to this. It will not synergize with your game plan. But your game plan might be to be defensive and then find good 2-card hands, at which case that is at least somewhat synergistic. And the reason I say it's not fully synergistic is because there will be times where you draw 4 defensive cards and you can't use them because either you've taken tempo, or because your opponent doesn't attack with enough damage, or simply because it just isn't as good a math as if you had done anything else.
Yeah, tempo's a good word for it. Tempo's a good word for it. Where like if you have these defense reactions for for value, effectively, like you're bringing them in for value, you may have a turn cycle where you gain tempo. Your opponent is blocked with their hand. You go over to their hand and you draw fucking defense reactions. So now, all that advantage, you're just like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of all of that advantage because you have some sort of unlucky draw, and it's really bad.
And this could be the same for any other. So I'm using defense reactions because I think they're very easy to understand this concept of, but it could be cards that are specifically tech cards. Of course, Brendan talks about Kano. It could be cards for Kano, right? It could be cards like Oasis Respite. It could be even opportunity cost of your equipment, right? Because you decide to play Null or Spell Void, and what's the opportunity cost for your equipment? But even further than that, even further than down the road, after what you're doing to the 60 cards and the equipment setup that you present into that niche matchup, or your tech for that matchup, what does it actually do to your 80 matchup? And we'll talk further about that with someone's tip coming up. But I want to go to Brody Spurlock if we can.
Yeah,
Brendan Patrick.
If
you, for some reason, are not familiar with who Brody Spurlock is, he's a Pro Tour top 8 competitor, US National top 8 competitor. He must have a lifetime achievement for battle hardness.
Has his own card in Flesh and Blood. I don't think it's been printed yet, but
true. Yes, he's the first ever invitational, whatever Flesh and Blood are calling it, winner.
Yep. Had a 1 week advantage in terms of limit. No, I'm kidding. I'm joking.
My goodness, as if. Shout out to Brody for responding to me on this one. Don't be afraid to. So Brody says, don't be afraid to abandon everything that everyone has considered correct for a long time. In short, try everything. So this is interesting because this plays on what we talked about before around, kind of, you were saying net decking's underrated, which 100% is, but how do you use that information, right? So Brody's saying, don't be afraid to abandon that. And then he says, if you want more detail, an example of both parts of that from his time working on Azalea. He made 2 big changes to the core of Azalea. One was abandoning generic attacks like E-Strike and Rebel that had always been staples in the interest of focusing more on the powerful things that Azalea does, shooting arrows. Brody also cut Deadeye and all the blue cards to make the whole deck yellow line, always playing off of 2 resources from a yellow or 1 from Tunic. This was largely made possible by the Living Legion of Ice. So the format changes, Brody kind of surveys it, sees an opportunity, makes a change to kind of what is the core perceived way to build and play Azalea. So Brody says, on the subject of trying everything, probably his 2 biggest mistakes working on Azalea were assuming that Amplifying Arrow and Codex of Bloodrot were bad, without ever playing a game with either. In the case of Codex of Bloodrot, he says, I had the false idea in my head that Codex of Inertia was better than Codex of Bloodrot, so after testing and disliking Inertia, I just assumed that Bloodrot would be worse. So Brody's saying, a little bit of a learning there around don't assume things, try things out when it comes to deck building, and also don't be afraid to abandon what is considered, kind of the given to try other things. And I think one thing I want to add on that for Brody, I think when the time to do that, because Brody is obviously a very smart player, very smart deck builder, Brody identified a reason to abandon, right? You talked about net decking being underrated. I actually agree with you, Brendan, massively. And Brody's talking about, well, on the flip side of that, don't be afraid to just abandon all that and go after your own thing, which we kind of cautioned against just before. But what I would say, the kind of the learning from both of what Brendan and Brody have said, I think is that you have to have a reason to do it. Brody clearly identified a reason. Ice Living Legend, blue resources not being fully utilized, the opportunity to trim down on resources and have more powerful cards in your deck that relate to your hero ability. And we just talked about, don't get distracted from your key game plan, right? Ravenous Rabble, E-Strike, yes, they're damage and they're maybe efficient cards, but they don't help with your overall game plan, right? So Brody walked away from those in favor of cards that relate more to the key game plan, the core game plan.
Yeah, I'm remembering back to the early days of Flesh and Blood when even I believed in this concept that everybody else was just bad and that all their decks were bad and all their ideas were bad. And to an extent, I was right. But you can take that idea way too far. And I think that, there were some good players and good deck builders in the early days of the game that, maybe we didn't pay enough attention to and we could have gotten ideas from. And again, it's just deck builders are an interesting breed, man, because a true talented deck builder is rare. And a true talented...
I'm not sure they exist in Flesh and Blood.
A true talented deck builder without an ego, you point me to that person.
So the problem with Flesh and Blood, I think, versus other games when it comes to deck builders is, I think generally deck builders in this game are also good players because you actually have to...
That's funny.
Have a lot of You have to have a lot of understanding of the fundamental way a game plays out. So sometimes there's just decks that are just busted, right? Like in terms of just this one thing that's really busted. But generally in Flesh and Blood, especially as we move into more modern Flesh and Blood, probably Fab 2.0 onwards, more so Flesh and Blood is about understanding the cycles of a game and what happens in the meta. And I think deck builders who are exploiting that fact are often doing so because they also understand how to play the game and how a game plays out.
Name one good deck builder in Flesh and Blood that's a bad player. I couldn't name one, to be honest.
I can't name. I can maybe name you a couple who haven't had the results that others have had.
Yeah,
but I think they're still
Magic.
Very good players.
I think in like a game like Magic, I've seen high level pros net deck lists from. I mean, there may be good players as well, but you see people posting lists all the time. Maybe somebody has an idea that other people don't, and they can just kind of sit there and brew decks. I don't really know any brewers in Flesh and Blood that I would look to for information that are high level players, because I do think the amount of context and understanding you need of the game is like, I guess you just can't build it from like sort of like a base kind of theory, right? Like it is it's very kinetic. You have to test it and you have to understand.
It's interesting. I think in Flesh and Blood, in something like Magic, you also have a lot of perfect information as well because of the amount of data being pumped through on Arena of formats early and people trying things. But I'm going to leave that because I don't want to touch that. I'm going to shout out to the lads at We Make Best. Hey, they're good. They're good players as well, but they do come up with generate a lot of ideas. Most of them are completely busted and broken. But they generate a lot of ideas, I think, which is really cool. So I'm going to shout out to those guys. And I think maybe aside from Liam, I'm not sure if the rest of that crew maybe had the results, but they're still very good deck builders. So I think, if you're looking for someone like that, Brendan, maybe We Make Best of the.
I love that. I'll be sure to tell them next time I see him in person. They're like, hey, tell me to hit you up if I'm looking for good deck builders and bad players.
I did not say that because I think I am 0-2 or 3 against BNet. I know that for sure. All right. I want to go to Aaron Shantz next because I think he has something that kind of plays into what we just talked about a little bit. This is honestly, a lot of these things are so connected. And I hope that, firstly, I was really excited about doing this topic and getting this perspective from a lot of these pro players and deck builders. But also, I think a lot of these actually just intertwine. And I hope that by the time we get to the end of this, people can see some really common themes and can take these away to put into practice when it comes to deck building in Flesh and Blood. So Aaron Shantz, who's a 2023 World's Top 4 competitor, calling top 8er, a few other results I'm definitely missing for Aaron, but one of my favorite people when it comes to pragmatic approaches to deck building. I'm always curious to hear what he has to say. Aaron says, I think if I were to sum up in one sentence, while it's good to have a plan for every matchup, it's important to recognize when it's not worth expending deck slots trying to fix a bad matchup. Aaron goes on to say, I see a lot of people go down rabbit holes trying to have a good matchup into everything, but this can easily lead to situations where you spread your core game plan too thin and end up sacrificing overall power or consistency into the rest of the field. Bringing your win rate in one matchup from 25% to 35% isn't really worth it if you lose 5% into the rest of the field because you spread your game plans too thin. The 35% matchup that you spent all those sideboard slots on is still a bad matchup, but now you're also more likely to randomly lose against good matchups as well. Sometimes you just have to accept that you'll probably have to get a bit lucky against your worst matchup if you're going to win. What are your thoughts, Brendan?
I guess I did copy him a little bit. I didn't realize to the extent. Yeah, clearly I agree with that. Yeah, it's a hard agree for me.
I think if I was to go one step even further on what Aaron's saying, the fact that you put all this time and effort and changes into a deck to fix a potential matchup and maybe not even fix it enough. Sometimes you can psyops yourself into thinking you fixed a matchup when really you haven't. But also you're spending so much time and effort on that matchup. So you were talking about like a low percentage matchup, right? Aaron's just talking about in general. So it could be something like, here's an example, right? So Dash for Nationals, we wanted to target Zen. We also thought that KO would be pretty well represented, and we thought Enigma was going to be well represented. We were able to fix the Enigma matchup with the addition of Hanabi Blaster into that Dash list without the expenditure of too many slots. Honestly, it was basically 3 slots. It was the Yellow Throttles, which we wanted to play anyway, and the Hanabi Blaster. So pretty low impact to fix that, right? And then we looked at the new matchup. And honestly, I played a lot of that matchup, different strategies. At one point, I changed 10 cards in the deck, and it felt like I was basically doing that. I changed 10 cards, and I maybe got an extra 5 or 10% in the matchup in Edge. And you know what? Just not worth it. Just isn't worth it. New actually ended up being the second most played deck in my Nationals, which I got a little bit wrong. I thought it was going to be maybe the 3rd or 4th most played. I luckily managed to dodge New on my 6-0 run in CC. But I think that's part of it. Like, you just have to at some point understand, okay, this matchup I can't improve enough, or not, it's going to be at the detriment of the rest of my game plans, and you just got to walk away. So I massively agree with what Aaron says there.
The psychology of bad matchup in this game is particularly interesting. I find that Flesh and Blood players maybe not more than, but they tend to really not. They tend to be bad matchup averse, which is a good thing.
Bad matchups,
which is a good thing, but to an extreme that is to the extent that I think it is a detriment.
And you know what I think it is people also misunderstand what that psychology is. They think, okay, here's my bad matchups as X deck. I'm going to spend all this time testing and making this matchup better. All the while, actually, this matchup you thought was a good matchup actually isn't that good, and also requires a lot of reps and skill to play the matchup. And you haven't been spending time on it, and then they go along to their Road to Nationals or their ProQuest or whatever, and they lose to their good matchup 2 out of 3 times, and they go, I got unlucky. No, you just didn't spend time, or you made your deck so bad into that matchup because you went so far away from your core game plan, or you hadn't tested it enough that that's the reason you lost. So, but maybe a bit brutal, Brendan, but honestly, I think that happens so often. I see it so often. And people, they post their deck lists or whatever, and they're just like, 1 of this, 2 of this, 1 of this, 2 of... They're just a mess. And I'm like, what is the core game plan here? It looks like you've taken a really good 60-card deck, you've trimmed about 20 cards out of it for just absolute rubbish to try and fix a matchup that you can't fix, and you've massively made other matchups worse, just like Aaron's talking about here. And it happens so much, honestly.
Yeah. It's just funny you mentioned that, because I get memed in Lorcana because I'm a 4 of sort of purist, and I really
love it.
Yeah, I really like max card counts and max consistency, and I get a lot of shit for it, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's just funny you mentioned that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it happens.
So the thing is when you, even Flesh and Blood, you take a 3 of and you swap it out to be a 2 of, and you add this 1 of in your deck. I feel like it's nearly impossible to get a sample size large enough to actually evaluate that change significantly, right? Because when you take when you make the 1 of and you dilute what was your core game plan down to a 2 of this critical card, you just like to what extent it makes your general game plan, your general core game plan, your general matchup sped X% worse, and to what extent the 1 of tech card makes your one bad matchup X% better is just so hard to evaluate with such a small sample size that when I see decks that are full of 1 ofs and 2 ofs, I'm just like, it just looks like garbage. Like
it usually is garbage.
Yeah, it usually is garbage, but I find that it's more like, it's almost a cathartic thing to do, right? It's like, okay, I have this deck, it's tuned, but I don't have this 1 card that lets me deal with this thing that this deck does, right? It's like, let me put 1 tech card in there. And it's just silly, right? Because now to think about the scenario where that lines up and it actually does exactly what you want to do, and you correctly evaluate the opportunity cost of having your deck when you don't need it in that specific scenario. It's a lot more complicated than it feels when you make that decision, because I think a lot of times those decisions are made out of emotion, and they're not made out of, sort of like an objective kind of, as much as you could, evaluation of the actual data.
Yep. I think you've got a great question highlighted for next, which we'll go to, but I want to add kind of a tip from me on this, and this is something that I'm a big proponent of, is understanding when to play 1 of a card, when to play 2 of a card, when to play 3 of a card. And this is the general Mikey Bingo cards. Hayden Dale's going to say heuristic,
Oh, shit.
not Brendan Patrick.
Mr. Heuristic, Hayden Dale.
This is this is generally how I'd approach it. 3 of a card, you want to draw it every game. You're playing it because it's the best option in that slot, or it's the best option in your deck. You want to see this card as much as possible or consistently every game. So there's going to be your power cards, they're going to be your best resource cards, they're going to be your best efficient cards, right? The reason, I'll go to 2 last. The reason to play 1 of a card. If you play 1 of a card, the reason you're doing that generally is because it might be powerful or it might have a specific interaction for a matchup, but you never want to draw 2 of that card. So it could even just be powerful, but you just never want to draw 2 of that card in the same hand because it can be so punishing. I'll use an example of this in Dash. I hate playing 2 backup protocol red, even though I think the card is really powerful, because if I ever draw 2 backup protocol reds in the same turn, they are terrible. They are so terrible together. So I never want to play, I never like playing 2 or 3 of that card. I just play 1. And then I think the reason to play 2 of a card often, usually, is because you're trying to, you've started at 3 and you're trying to fix ratios. And so you come down to 2 cards for that option because either you don't need a perfect number of blues, so you are down to a bunch of 3 elves and blues and then a 2 elf and a blue, or you have worked out that you need an extra 6 attack in your brute deck, so you're playing 2 elves of these 6s, but you don't need a third one, for instance, because of ratios. That's generally where I'm playing 3, 2, 1, Brendan. And I think that's something to stick by, I think, honestly. It's helped me a lot in deck building.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and yeah, I've taken some of those. I think I love the not wanting to draw more than 1 of, because it's like rather than these ideas being rooted in, because you can kind of do the hypergeometric calculation on like draw percentages for the 1, 2, 3s. I think that I often find that using those heuristics that you mentioned there does sort of make the decision a lot more clear cut, although it is maybe not as, I don't know if it is as effective sort of mathematical, or if it is the integrity of the math is as high. I prefer to operate off the kind of heuristics that you mentioned there for 1-ofs, 2-ofs, and 3-ofs.
So I'm big on like kind of the law of averages and using the hypergeo to just work out kind of roughly my ratios and you know, like for instance, I love using it for blues, especially in new limited formats. How much am I likely to draw? You know, I want to see 2 blues in my hand. How many should I play? I never want to see 2 blues, etc. But when you go down to some of the minutes of like 1 card in 60, the sample size that you end up going to be playing is so small that, yes, the rough math is great, but the accurate math is probably not that relevant, honestly. You're probably just better off having a general understanding. Also, because you don't know when you're going to draw it. So let's say I draw my 2 of backup protocol in a hand. Am I drawing it in a dead rubber that doesn't matter? Or am I drawing it in the finals of my nationals? You know what I mean? Like, when am I drawing it? And then people will say some things like, well, you know, don't play them in matchups that matter. Well, they all matter.
I love that. That's like the Ivophilia fallacy. It's like what matchups. So before Kindle, before Kindle. Yeah, oh my god, the Gorganian. No, that one's even better.
I think we fell victim to that one a little bit.
Yeah, well, the Ivophilia one is particularly interesting because I find Ivophilia's actually hit it, lose the game. Where I think that Gorganian Tomes, your opponent plays Gorganian Tome, draws 2 cards, you are significantly disadvantaged. Ivophilia is actually combo off, auto lose for the potential to have like these sort of marginally better turns in the early game with something like Ivophilia. It's really interesting. But ultimately, no matter how you cut that cake, no matter how deep down the rabbit hole you go, I think it is just correct to play the good card.
Play the powerful card. I agree. All right. This even goes back to people telling me when I first was building Dash decks, like, why are you playing maximum velocity? You should be playing payload in that situation. You know. Anyway, let's go to Ethnic Smoke, who some of you know as commentator, caster extraordinaire, one of my favorite casters, but also is actually a phenomenal deck builder. Has calling top 8 in Singapore with a very innovative Icelander list back when people weren't really playing Icelander, was quite well known for his Icelander list. Recent Battle Hardened winner on New. Often you'll see Ethnic Smoke, Punkage playing these heroes that people are kind of maybe not quite got into. They'll eventually be big heroes or big decks, but often he's Ethnic Smoke is at the kind of forefront of those. So this is what Ethnic Smoke says. My number 1 tip is to know your ratios. The first level is figuring out your resource space, i.e. the number of blues that you want in any configuration of 60, but there are hero-specific ratios past that. For example, in Warrior, there are also how many go against sources do I want? Or in New, it's how many not an attack cards can I afford to run? Or in Dash.io, it's how many items should I have? Once you know that in an ideal 60 you want a certain number of resource cards and a certain number of these hero-specific cards, then you can start coming up with matchup configurations. And as you're coming up with these matchup plans, you should do your best to maintain these ideal ratios. For example, into new, you might want to side out certain blues. So now you know that ideally you have some other blues to side in as replacements, so your ratios aren't skewed for your core game plan. Or in another direction, maybe you want to side in 3 copies of Blanche for Prism. Now you know which cards you can afford to cut from the 60 for Blanche, such that your ratios are maintained. Straying too far from your hero-specific ratios and your blue ratios when sideboarding is an easy trap to fall into, so do your best to avoid that. I really like that advice. Not just the blue ratios, but the hero-specific ratios from Ethnic Smoke there I think are fantastic.
Reminds me of US Nationals #1, where we have...
Math don't math.
Yeah, math don't math. We've been testing this Earthbriar deck. It's been doing well in testing. It was doing fine in testing. Feels like a powerful deck. We've been testing the Lightning Briar for multiple days now. It's like, okay, we got it. Me and Zach Bond. What if we utilize mathematics? pull out the Excel sheet, start doing the math, make the changes. Don't test the deck. Show up the day of. Oh my! Steaming pile of you know what? It was non-functional. Interesting that happened. I learned a really, really good lesson from that exchange, to be honest. I really did. And I will never be doing that again. It's that the math could only get you so far. You need to actually play the deck and understand how that math sort of feels in the game.
Mm-hmm. I think this is one of my favorite tips that we got from everyone. And of course it came from Ethnic Smoke. No surprises. But yeah, I do think that the core of your deck is always going to be your resource base and your cards that specifically enact your game plan. So I think if I was to expand a little bit more on what Ethnic Smoke is saying, I think, Ethnic Smoke is talking about specific ratios for the hero-specific cards. So use the examples of Nu there, Dash.io, etc. I think those two are great. If I was to add a third pillar into that, I think the third pillar is your power cards and the cards that are going to enact your game plan. So if we use the Nu example, it's also going to be some of the really key, probably attack cards that are going in there as well. So, and some of those, some of these might change depending on the matchup, but some of them won't. Some of them will just be given in there. Same for Dash.io. I think sometimes, there's just going to be attacks like red zipper hit. It's not going anywhere. Red 0 to 60. It's not going anywhere. That's a core to your deck because that card is so powerful and it enacts your core game plan of attacking and boosting. So I think, you can have those 2 pillars that Ethnic Smoke is talking about. And then I even would advocate that kind of third pillar being the rest of your core of your deck, which is very rarely going to change, which is going to be those power cards. And if it does change, you're trying to change like for like, especially in those 2 pillars that Ethnic Smoke is talking about. So, and Dory, my go again enablers and my resource cards, what's coming in and out in those situations. So let's go to Pablo Pinto. Brendan, as I said,
Pro Tour champion, one of the most acclaimed players in Flesh and Blood history, and one of my favorite deck builders.
My favorite deck builder. You're just reading my notes. No, Pablo, genuinely, I think, I talked before about the reasons to play 3, 2, 1 of a card. I have a feeling, I've actually never asked Pablo this, but I think he subscribes to a very similar philosophy to myself. I think a lot of players do, actually, honestly. But I love Pablo's decks because I think they're always very clean. And this is what Pablo says. I would say my number 1 tip would be to build your deck around an idea, be it a game style like Fatigue or Aggro decks, or a combo, Kano or Bolton, or some kind of power plays. Start with the cards that are needed for your idea and continue building from there, always with a clear picture of what you want this deck to be doing. Try to add things that help that idea or protect you from bad matchups. And if the deck doesn't work at first, almost no deck does, by the way, that's what Pablo says, back to the drawing board. Don't be afraid to go back to the drawing board, Pablo says. So yeah, I think it's a great piece of advice. Start with a really clear, and this is something I also personally love to do, start with a really clear one piece of something that you're trying to attack in mind, whether that's you're trying to attack the meta, you're like a specific deck. I'm trying to attack Zen and what Zen does with being able to play multiple cards in a turn. I'm trying to enact a very powerful single strategy. He gives some examples there around like an aggro deck or something like Kano, or potentially my plan is to, not that I love it, to fatigue people. So how am I starting with that? And then build your plan out from there.
I've been reminded of one of my favorite deck builders, almost begrudgingly favorite deck builder, Matt Rogers actually. And I have to toss up to one key example, and you were a part of this as well. because it ultimately kind of led to a nationals win for you, I believe. And that, like, do you remember post US Nationals, the Viscerai deck?
Mm-hmm.
I swear to God, I tried every single day for a month to try to find a way to tweak that Viscerai deck, and I did not. The list I ended up with after a month was the same. I think you ended up changing it a bit, but I remember working every single night with Dante Delfico, I believe Tower number 9 at the time, trying to tweak that combo mid-range Viscerai deck. And I think at the end, we may have changed 1 or 2 cards. And this was a deck that was not on the... You had played it at that... You had brought Viscerai to that tournament, I believe. You were on a bit of a different version.
Different iteration.
Yeah. But I just remember just grinding my... I don't even know what the word would be. My face against trying to tweak that deck. And I couldn't. It was really well made.
Yeah, so that story's quite interesting, I think, because US Nationals, the first US Nationals, this is 2020 or 2021. What year was this?
Dude, I don't know.
I'm looking at my trophy.
You tell me Flesh and Blood's been out for 5 years. I'm like,
5 years.
Since when?
So first US Nationals, there's also the Calling Orlando the same weekend.
Yeah.
And so I've come over to play Calling Orlando. I got a great opportunity to come over for that. So it's the first time me and Brendan met, actually. And I had been working on Viscerai. I'd actually put up a Viscerai deck tech on Patreon before that weekend and was actually kind of deciding if I was going to play. So we had the Earthbriar deck. There's obviously the Lightning Briar deck that was known at that point, and then there's Viscerai. The Viscerai list I had felt really good into the rest of the field, except for Lightning Briar. And it looked like Lightning Briar was going to be probably, honestly, could be like a quarter of the meta, which seemed insane for an open event. So I've been playing, had this idea about how you kind of play really aggressively advantageous kind of math into a lot of matchups. But the Lightning Briar with the stacking of Earth tokens was just too powerful. The math was too much better. But Nick Butcher and Matt played this deck, but I think Nick and Matt built this deck. Basically went a more combo route with the Skeletor as opposed to an aggressive route with the Skeletor. And in the end, so Matt top 8s or top 4s that calling with that deck. For Australian Nationals, New Zealand Nationals, me and Dan kind of take the idea we had originally, take the idea that Nick and Matt had and kind of combine them into sort of like this kind of Viscerai deck, basically, that we ended up winning Australian Nationals with. And one of the, I think, the kind of advantages to kind of how we took those two pieces and put them together was actually we managed to kind of fix the Prism matchup, which seemed abysmal. With just the combo version, and was a really good matchup for our deck, but we couldn't beat Lightning Briar, so we were able to solve a couple of matchups, which I think was great. But I want to go into, because we've got something from Nick Butcher here as well, and I think, look, shout out to Matt, obviously one of the most decorated Flesh and Blood players of all time. It's kind of insane the amount of calling top 8s. I think he's got 5 Nationals top 8s at this point as well. I think Nick does a lot of the deck building behind that. I'm going to say I think Nick is the deck builder of the two, I will say. So Nick is a calling winner, national champion, 10th place recently at Pro Tour LA. He's got, I think, 5 or 6 calling top 8s at this point as well, and I think is just one of the better deck builders out there. I've worked with him on a few decks before. I've played some of his decks before. Nick says something along the lines of focus on what your deck does best and optimize that. Don't try to do everything. And Nick, often a man of few words, says, if what your deck does isn't good enough, then remove bias because you like the hero. And he puts in brackets, very prevalent in the illusionist community, close bracket, and play something else. So Nick says, know when to walk away, know when to abandon it, and know when to not play the hero that you're in love with.
I feel like Nick is a little bit in love with some heroes sometimes. You think Nick?
Maybe he is also. He does definitely gravitate to them, but he does also abandon them. He played Dory at LA, but I think he played it for the right reasons.
Yeah, he got 10th too. So he started off his tournament pretty bad, right? With Dizio too?
1, 2, because he was in the same pod as me. We're in the same draft pod.
Yeah.
It's
quite the run to 10th.
100% was. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that kind of abandoned heroes? Know when not to play Kano, Brendan?
Well, it's different. You see, Nick has 5 calling top 8s. I have 2. And there's a reason for that. Because sometimes I optimize for fun.
Well, aren't those both limited? You're calling top 8s?
Yeah, I'm kind of known as a limited savant these days, actually.
Limited specialist. Just checking in on that one.
They are both limited, yes. They are.
Do you want to go to... I think it's good advice, though. Yeah, I actually just forgot. Do you want to... How about you read one? Why don't you... Have we got any left to read, or is that's it? This is the last one.
It's a Hayden Dale.
Okay. I kind of already... Yeah, we can come back to that. All right, I'll go to Tariq Patel. This is Tariq Patel, who is a 2-time national champion of 2 different countries, and calling top 8er, says, if I were to encapsulate the essence of good deck building in just one word, it would be honesty. To delve deeper, it is critical to first establish a thorough understanding of the most popular existing decks before embarking on the task of building your own. I think that's great. Understand the meta first before you start to build decks. I think it's a great call-out. That's Hayden saying that, by the way. Back to what Tariq's saying. By comparing your deck building ideas against the established benchmarks of the format, you can determine if your concept measures up. If your deck meets or comes close to these benchmarks, it may have potential and merit further investigation. On the other hand, if it fails this basic test, it's best to move on quickly. Once you've determined that a particular deck or strategy is theoretically feasible, the next step is to test it in practice and ensure it can withstand the rigor of actual gameplay. If it does not perform as expected, you must be prepared to go back to the drawing board, something that Pablo said as well, and reassess. This process underscores the importance of honesty, as it's all too easy to deceive ourselves into believing something we want to be true to protect our own egos. You talked a little bit about that, Brendan. And then Tariq also says, open bracket, cough delusionist, bracket, close bracket. And then he likes to add a little quote at the end. Tariq says, it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. That's a Mark Twain quote. So thanks, Tariq, just showing his intellectual prowess there with Mark Twain quotes. There's a couple of things here I want to break down. I think to the first part where Tariq says, to delve deeper, it's crucial to first establish a thorough understanding of the most popular and existing decks and embark on a task of building before you embark on the task of building your own. I think that's massive. You've got to understand what the meta is that you're building a deck for. So I'll give an example. Post Nationals, I was like, Tickle Vossen kind of has a powerful hero ability, right? And I was like, I wonder what I could like brew up with Tickle Vossen. Brewing, tinkering, come up with what I think is a pretty cool like Tickle Vossen list. I think it's like very powerful. I think it uses kind of the hero ability really well, kind of has some really good numbers in it, right? And then I go, right, okay, how am I going to play this deck? And then I realized that actually it's terrible in this meta and has probably the top 4 decks, has 3 bad matchups into the top 4 decks. So didn't understand the meta first, built a deck. Makes no sense, right?
Yeah.
What's the point?
Cheerios Briar, pretty good. So good, it's been errated. So good, it hit Living Legend. What about Prism?
Cheerios Prism.
How about that?
Oh my God.
That could be pretty powerful, couldn't it? Hey, that deck slapped. Just wasn't the time. This
is the thing, right? Sometimes, so that's actually a good example because you can start with when it comes to deck building, I think you can start with an idea of how to attack. Yeah, you can start with an idea of how to attack the meta, I think, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you can start like, okay, I understand the macro, I understand where I want to target. Sometimes you start with a bit more micro, right? You start with a seed of an idea that might be really powerful. The problem is if you start with that seed of an idea that might be really powerful, what you do need to still first understand is actually what the meta looks like, because you can very quickly go, oh, I have the seed of an idea, I think it's really powerful, but actually if I think about it theory-wise, it just doesn't line up into the current meta.
Yeah.
Maybe we shelve that for another time. I'm coming back to Tickle Vossen, Brendan. We'll come back to that.
Just 1+1, baby. Cheerios is powerful. Prism's powerful. It's like a ham sandwich.
Cheerio Prism absolutely sucked. So
it did not suck. It was pretty good. We decided to not play it as to not spoil.
Yes.
We're
Brendan's
saving it for
saving
Worlds.
it. Yeah, he's still saving it for Worlds 4 years later. So, but I think that's very true. Like, if you don't understand the meta, you can waste so much time on the seed of an idea that might be really powerful. It honestly might be, but is it powerful enough into the current meta? And I think just kind of lastly to look at what Tariq's kind of saying here, you know, once you've established that so you say you have this idea and you're like, okay, it might be powerful enough, the numbers might be good, then yeah, you need to run it into the meta and actually understand, is it actually that good? Or is it, you know, Zen just better, just does the numbers better, just does the thing better? Then maybe it's time to shelve it, reassess, go to something else, even like Nick was saying. I think that's, there's a lot of common themes through the tips from our pro players here around deck building, when to walk away, when to reassess, when to shelve things, how to learn, how to adapt. So I don't know, any standouts, any favorites from this list, anything you want to re-highlight before we kind of wrap up the pod, Brendan? I've loved doing this. I want to shout out, just first of all, for you to say a massive thank you to all those players who did respond to me and gave me their thoughts and opinions.
Yeah, I think Tarek's is the most eloquent. I think Aaron's is kind of hits home the most for me. There's one question I would love to ask all of these players, and that includes you on this list. I'd love to ask all these people why they play card games, because it's actually not that clear. If you think about it, because Tarek particularly piques my interest because I just it's clearly not to have, I'm sure they have fun doing it, but it's not to have fun. I wonder what it satisfies for each of them individually and why they're motivated or why they gravitate towards, a card game like Flesh and Blood more than anything else, more than a sport, more than poker, and, more than other games. It's actually fascinating to me. I know it's a bit of a tangent, but I think if you took all of these players on this list and you asked them that question, you would have some very, very interesting answers.
I'd be prepared to answer that question, but not right now. I think it's going to be at least a 20-minute tangent.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
I agree. It's interesting. I've thought about this before myself.
Same.
Many times because I've reflected on.
It's an unusual hobby. It's pretty incongruent with everything else you do in your life as well. So it's why does Hayden Dale why is this his thing? Why is this his outlet? Some of it's circumstance, but yeah.
Maybe we'll come back to it one day. But yeah, I did have my own. We've heard from Brendan. I did have my own tip as well, and I did give one about the kind of heuristics of ratios. But I said that my top tip is to have a clear understanding of what your deck is trying to do to attack the meta. If your deck is built off a philosophy of doing something that isn't either extremely powerful or to counter the meta, it should probably just be dropped. Run the numbers and you'll find out if a proactive strategy is really worth pursuing. Riptide versus Dash is an example. So I was looking at Riptide, and what does it do in this format right now? The numbers aren't as good as other decks out there, something like Dash, but does it disrupt something like Nu and Zen enough that I think it's interesting? And that's kind of why I've put some effort into Riptide. Ultimately, if I wanted just a pure number deck, I'd play Dash. Tickle Vossen, I already talked about that. So you can use Theory to save a lot of time. I kind of talked a lot about this kind of my tip throughout a lot of the other tips, but yeah, I think Theory can often do a lot of the legwork and save you a lot of time when it comes to deck building.
Very interesting. I think that a lot of these answers were particularly interesting. And I think what really piques me, what really piques my interest when reading these things is I think that there's a lot of sort of generally applicable concepts that are sort of the foundational ideas for a lot of these. Like pretty much the core idea of what Tarek was saying was to be data oriented and to be objective, but also that ego is the enemy. And I genuinely believe that. And then this whole idea of optimizing into an unknown and expected metagame, and how to do that correctly, and how to not, like Aaron said, how to not optimize for what is already a bad matchup at the cost of, losing a certain kind of edge to the general field. It's very, very interesting. I actually really like this. I really like this. And then Ethnic Smoke is all about sort of the first thing and the most important thing you need to understand is just the fundamental math of your deck. But you need to understand that before you can make any relevant decisions.
Yeah, Brody talks about making assumptions and how dangerous assumptions can be in this game as well. So yeah, I'd love to know.
Yeah, and there's one more. And Daniel Mackay and Brendan Patrick talk about copying other people's work.
Makes sense. Two of my friends there. I want to, if you're in the YouTube comments, drop us a comment below. Let us know what you thought of this episode, this kind of style of getting out to quiz the pros and getting some feedback and some tips and tricks. I love this. I think the insight that was kind of gathered is really cool. Let us know what your favorite tip is from our deck builders and pros. And I'll leave it to Brendan to take us out from there.
Yep. Well, if you enjoy this podcast, number one thing you do is leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Twitter's are Brendan APG and Fan_Dale. Shout out to all the Arsenal Pass patrons for helping us do what we do. Good luck to everybody preparing for the upcoming Pro Tour in Amsterdam. I'm very excited to see how it all shakes out. Will Zen still be the dominant deck? We shall see. But until then, thank you all so much for listening. We'll see you in the next episode.